Namaste, yogis. Hi, I'm Suzanne Doolin, the founder of Sadhana, and I am here today in Business Corner with my friend Stephanie Bonvissuto, who's actually here at my house. Stephanie is a graduate student in women's studies.
Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies.
Oh, okay.
Mm-hmm.
Um, and she also is a multiple award winner, including in 2012, she won the Sociologist for Women in Society Award, as well as many other awards. She is an expert in lots of things related to gender and sexuality, but today we're going to be discussing how you can create a safe space in your yoga business for people in the LGBT plus community.
Oh, nice.
And we're
Okay.
going to talk about some of those terms. So Stephanie, would you like to say hello?
Sure. Hi, everyone. So to add a little bit to that introduction, right. So right now I am a second going into third year PhD student, again, in the Women's Gender and Sexuality Studies Department of Stony Brook University. Before that, I got a joint sociology and women and gender studies master's degree at Brandeis University in Massachusetts. And I also received 2 BAs, one in women's studies and the other in sociology from the University of Massachusetts in Boston. And while I was there, I was also the student coordinator of the Queer Student Center. I was also a member of the queer working team at my Reform Jewish synagogue. Before that, I was a sitting board member at an LGBT center in Westchester County called The Loft from 2005 to 2009, where I was also a peer-trained facilitator, volunteer, event coordinator, and outreach speaker.
So she's amazing, basically.
Oh, she said that. I did not pay her to say that, I promise.
Stephanie and I know each other through our temple. We both studied the Torah together. Mainly, that's how we mainly know each other. We also simply attend services, but particularly we like to study Torah together.
Yes.
So today we're going to be talking about how to create safe spaces for the LGBT plus community. And we're going to start with some basic definitions.
And the plus has often meant Q, A, I, and we'll get to some of those terms in a moment. But we've decided to talk about some basic terminology because gender is a complex conversation. And to be able to talk about it means to have some sort of shared vocabulary. So let's talk about that right now. Please know that the definitions that we're going to be sharing and talking about can be particular to various people and groups. So what you hear here is a starting point, is by far not an exhaustive list or an exhaustive discussion. But let's use this as a starting point, as a baseline.
So basically, if you want to know the full story, you have to go to Stephanie's classes
Please.
at Stony Brook. But for our conversation today,
Yes.
we did want people to be aware of, what exactly are we even talking about when we talk about LG and all those other letters.
Right. So some of this we're going to be talking about are actually identities that deal with sexuality. Some of them are going to be identities that deal with gender. And if you already have question marks about that, perfect. That's great. Let's get it right into that. So there is a difference between sex, sexuality, and gender. And a real easy way to break this down is think about sex as being biological. Right, so that could be genitalia or body configuration or hormones, DNA, stuff like that, chromosomes. So that is usually categorized as sex. Now, sexuality really means desire, right? So it's not only how we feel on the inside, but who we're often partnered up with. That could be opposite sex, that could be same sex, that could be multiple partners, that could be by yourself. So that's sexuality. And finally, gender. And yes, I am making that distinction, and that distinction is pretty well recognized now between sex and gender. They are not the same. They are really not interchangeable anymore. right? So if we were talking about, right, we talked about sex before, and one of the markers of that being genitalia between the legs, gender is seen as more cognitive. It is an identity that we feel comfortable with on a spectrum, and there's some challenge to that word. We can discuss that later.
A lot
But
of people struggle with that idea of like, oh, you know, somebody can look like they can have lady parts, but they identify not as a lady. So
right, so this is where things become interesting. They become a little bit more complex than we may have grown up with before, right? So again, there is a difference between sex and gender. Sex is more or less biological, and that's a very simplistic definition. And gender is a cognitive and emotional identity that's really internal and within, and it can be separate. For people who are in alignment with their sex and their gender, the word for that is being cisgendered. Cis is actually a scientific prefix meaning the same, whereas CIS, right? And for people who feel,
I didn't know that was a scientific. I always wondered where that came from. Scientific.
Yes,
Okay.
it did.
So what does it mean?
It means that you feel an alignment between your sex and your gender, right? So your gender identity, you feel at peace, you feel aligned with your body.
So same. Your
right.
Sex and your gender.
But if you're feeling a difference, and usually that difference is very stressful, you don't feel that your gender identity is aligned with your body, that's considered transgender, which is a very broad umbrella term now. So again, transgender means different. It can mean a cross.
Okay.
Mm-hmm. So those are really the basic terms. We'll break it down a little bit more, right? If transgender is the big term, the umbrella term, then we have transsexual, we have cross-dressing, and so a non-binary. So what we tend to think about when it comes to gender is male and female, right? So there's this idea that there's a binary. If you're not male, then you are automatically by default female, one or the other. That's a bit of an antiquated kind of definition now, and it's a lot more nuanced, and many more people are now identifying as non-binary. Another word that can mean the same, although it can be also a little bit nuanced, is genderqueer.
What is that? I don't know if I've heard genderqueer.
So genderqueer.
I've heard asexual.
So genderqueer is this idea that your gender can be both male and female.
Oh.
It can be neither.
That's gender neutral, right? When you're
so some people can say that that can be androgynous.
Okay.
Androgynous, though, is also a term that's kind of falling out of favor right now.
That was big when I was in the teens, androgyny.
You're dating yourself with kids. I just want you to know. So genderqueer or non-binary, which means outside of the binary, right? That doesn't, so what does that mean? We usually let the individuals tell us what that means. So these are some of just a brief summary of some of the survey, of some of the definitions. And you can already see where this makes it more complex.
I want to back up a little because I started out saying like LGBT plus, and then
which are all sexuality.
And then we threw in all these other terms. I've sometimes just said, you know, sort of the gay community as sort of an umbrella term for all of these things. Is there, I mean, now there's so many, all these terms, asexual, gender neutral, gender, you know, I'm saying them all wrong already. So with all of these terms, is there a term that's now sort of encompassing all of this? Like, I even feel like I don't even know how to say it anymore.
So the two terms that are often used are either the trans community, and that specifically means gender, or the queer community, or even LGBT plus, as you said in the beginning, or LGBTQ for queer. Some people will tack on.
Q is questioning.
Queer questioning, absolutely. I said I is tacked on. I want to back that up a little bit because I don't actually like the term tacked on as if it's an afterthought or an asterisk, right? The I is for intersex. And there are some
Okay.
people who do see that as being part of the queer community. There are some people who say, actually, no, it should be separate. That letter I should be distinct.
Is that
And
when
it's
people
definitely
are,
not part of the,
that's when people are born with two sets
with,
of genitalia, or two
yes,
genitalia that's
right,
both.
or it's genitalia that can be defined by the medical community as being ambiguous. Right, and the way that they judge ambiguity is, believe it or not, through measurement.
I've seen that before.
Right.
That ruler, and
Right.
I don't know where I think it was on your page, but I didn't know that there's sort of a
The
gray
metric.
area where the doctors don't,
Right. I was just listening to a podcast today that was talking about the intersex community, which is alive, it's thriving, it's very important. And it is different and distinct from the trans community, different needs, different narratives. So it's really important that we make that distinction.
Well, I think that I'm sure each of these groups has their own specific issues that they talk about, but as somebody who is an ally and wanting to create a business that is welcoming to the queer community, first of all, one of the things I wanted to point out that you mentioned to me is that people are really grateful to have places where they're welcomed and are very loyal to the businesses that reach out to them. And so, from a business perspective, I think it's a nice, beyond just from a human perspective, it being a nice thing to do. I think also as a business, it's a nice way to create a community around your business that is a special community too.
Yeah, no, absolutely. The idea of inclusivity is, I think, incredibly important and timely and progressive. I don't see, now that we've reached a point, I think, in this culture, that all these identities are coming up, and we are now looking at individuals and populations as being intersectional. Right, that we're including not just gender, but race and class, and even immigration status. As we bring all these together, I think it's going to be very difficult to revert back from them. Right, we can't go backwards, or if we do, it's going to be very difficult. We need to keep going forward, and I think it's really smart for businesses to bear that in mind in their mission plans.
And be educated about it, even if you're not going to be right out there with the rainbow flag in front of your business. Even so, be educated, because this is happening, and it's something that, particularly yoga studios where we have changing spaces and bathrooms, really any business that has a physical space, or if you're working with people, as we do in the yoga community, to assist, that we should be aware, that just be thoughtful. And this is a beginning point for that education.
Right, and I'm actually going to use that as a segue into this idea of safe spaces, right? So safe spaces have a very interesting history to them. Many people, many experts will bring it back actually to the women's movement and consciousness raising groups, and even what was called then the gay movement, with various venues such as gay clubs, affording and creating this space where people could use as a refuge to be able to be out, to speak of their own stories in an assumed safe environment where they wouldn't be oppressively challenged by the various isms that were haunting them and harming them outside of those spaces.
How did they, has this just always been there, or was there a point where the queer community kind of said, we need safe spaces, and it started to become?
So it's been basically an evolution. Again, a lot of people bring it back to, say, the 1960s and 70s with this advent of the consciousness raising groups and various places, locales, clubs, bars, even people's homes where people could be out. We can even bring it back, I think, even a generation before, because certainly there were various locales, lesbian bars, for instance, where the Butch Femme community was thriving.
I was watching a documentary about an artist colony that was up in, I want to say it was Connecticut, and they were showing this woman artist who was now being recognized. Her work was sort of rediscovered, but they had pictures, historic pictures from this artist colony that was, I believe it was around the 1920s when you know, things got kind of swinging. And this whole artist colony was really known as a refuge for the queer community. And they had all these pictures of people in their sort of baggy, woolly swimsuit outfits, and, you know, men and men and women and women. And, you know, it was,
are you trying to say that you don't have a baggy swimsuit? I do. Okay.
Here at Stony Brook.
Yeah, so I mean, we're calling it safe space now. A generation or two before, it was certainly known otherwise. But I think historically, we can say consciousness raising groups of the 60s and 70s was a definitive safe space where important narratives were told, were heard, and identities were produced around that. So, but I think it's also really important to remember what projects were based upon these particular safe spaces. So again, these consciousness raising groups had a particular intent. The bars and clubs had a particular intent. The artist colony that you speak of had a particular intent, which defined the safe space. And also by safe, we should always point out there is no such thing as a completely safe space. So it may be important for us to always think about these locales as safer spaces. How can we make a space safer for the people who can access it? And again, there is no such thing as a space that will be 100% safe for everybody all the time.
I think about with yoga as our purpose is really to allow people to kind of be seeking an inward and not in a place where they're not necessarily feeling compared with other people, and that they can start to really explore their bodies. And I always feel like, well, I was just thinking as we started talking about this topic that people who may be going through a process of figuring out who they are, or maybe like somebody who is their sex and their gender don't match up, they're allowing them to be in their bodies could be so important to them. So what kind of things can we do to make people, you know, what should we be aware of that people are dealing with, and how can we make people feel like it's okay to be in your body, even though maybe you're not feeling okay in your body yet, maybe not yet, you know?
Well, I love that you brought up the word awareness. So that's so critical about this, because awareness of the transgender experience and the queer experience is vital at this time. We can't just assume that we know something. Even if we may think that we've had similar body experiences, it is not the same, and we need to really respect individuals' own journeys coming into this. So one thing that helps is to recognize people's agencies and autonomy around their bodies. And one way to do that is to see them. Right, I mean, you remember the movie, that 3D science fiction movie that came out in 2009. Avatar, yes. Okay, so Avatar, they had this great saying, right?
Blue.
Yeah. So here's how I'm going to tie it in. I promise I'm going to tie it in. They had a saying when they would greet each other, right? I see you, which I think is a really lovely greeting, right? I can see who you are. So that's really important for anyone, I think, but especially for people who may be going through some sort of gender transition, to be seeing who they are. How do we know who they are? They should tell us, and we should give them the space to tell us. So one way may be asking, not just them, let's not put a spotlight specifically on them, but maybe asking everybody, by what pronouns would you like to be known by?
As people come into your space. And,
Right.
it's, we were talking a little about this issue, but like for my daughter, she has a lot of friends who are going through, questioning their identities or genders and stuff. And she has some friends who I would never, ever in a million years imagine would identify as he or they because of the way they dress. And or she, I have found that just because I know them in a certain way or they dress a certain way, that may not be necessarily what they're thinking inside. Mm-hmm. And part of that, especially with these younger people, is that they may not be safe to express what they're feeling inside, and so they have to continue within their families to dress as the way that keeps them safe. Mm-hmm. And so, I think I've known people in the yoga community who will actually take on a new identity, like within a yoga discussion board, that they don't take other places because it's a way to, it's a place where they're outside of their family, they're right. outside of school, they're mm-hmm. outside of work, and they can be known in a totally different way.
So there's an analogy, right? So that's really good to know. In this way, maybe we can apply that to a new understanding of people and their identities. So, but you also brought up something else, right? This idea that maybe our idea of the binary and identities now may be challenged, right? So there may be somebody who we may think visibly looks a certain gender and they are identifying as another gender. We need to respect that.
So the only way we really know is to ask what gender,
because that also allows them and gives them the agency to tell us and inform us and say, see me as this. And then we can say, I see you as he. That's the way that you would, you have indicated. So everyone, he, she, they, Z, maybe even, right? So there's ZE is another.
I haven't heard that one.
Yeah. So letting people tell us, and we also have to remember it's going to be very likely, especially if you are new to this community, that you may trip over a pronoun.
You could be like Z.
Yeah, well, so it happens, right?
What is Z?
The best thing to do is to immediately acknowledge, apologize, and move on. Like, don't make a big deal about it. Don't be like, I need news cameras here, I need reporters here to just let the world know that I'm so sorry that I just misgendered you. No, just move on, right? But yeah, really try to identify as people have asked that they be identified by. Absolutely.
So when people come in and they're new to your business, then part of it is ask what pronouns they want to use. And is that just it? I mean, do we want to say, what's your gender, or do we just want to say, what's your pronoun?
No, I would say just pronoun. There are many people who, again, because they want to be seen and would like to be identified as who they are, but that doesn't mean giving their full biography.
Right.
Right. So what also helps is, and we definitely do this in the classroom, is just to go around, right? And maybe you do that before a class or something like, what's your name? Now you can say, well, what's your name and what pronoun would you like to be known by? And just go right through. This is becoming more and more the norm in various settings.
That's
right?
Interesting.
Mm-hmm.
I've also known, I have a friend who, he was an advocate for the change in the rules in the Boy Scouts. And they had a badge where it had the rainbow flag and a knot. And by wearing the badge, you would indicate that you were a safe person to people. They were saying that even it didn't matter whether somebody actually told you that they were queer or not. Just the fact that they knew that you were wearing the
Yes.
badge,
Makes it safe.
it just made it safe, made them feel safer.
But that
And
also,
they didn't even have to say anything. And so even just by doing that, even if they don't identify, they're still hearing, I'm aware that not everybody here may be the gender that I, perceive them as.
so here's a second thing. And this is really important, and this is becoming, this is showing up in more and more conversations lately. The idea of allyship, to be an ally. Well, that's great that one may have a badge, safety pin, maybe a rainbow on the wall. That's great, but it's not a noun. It's not just a noun. It's also a verb. Right. So to be an ally means to have various responsibilities and to live them and to practice them. And not only when you're like, oh, there's somebody who I may have identified as trans or non-binary in the room. So like now I have to be on. No, that means you're on all the time. That's the responsibility of being an ally. And that's what it means to be living in. And that's the expectation. Right. So if you're an ally, and this I think goes to many different vulnerable populations, whether it's trans, it's queer, maybe it's somebody who's a person of color. Okay, so you need to be living this and breathing this all the time.
And it's actually kind of going to seg into my talk on Thursday about how, I don't think that conversation was so much out there the way it is now, but how I really wasn't an active ally when I was younger, even though my family was always had many gay friends and I was aware of the issues, but I wasn't telling people that I was a safe person or that I was an ally. And I'll talk about that on Thursday, that journey, why I started speaking out about being an ally. And I would love to talk with you maybe some more, or on another talk about just how to be an ally more. And I think we are starting that conversation here about the business, but I think that there's
you can have whole
much
courses and classes about that. But one thing I will say, in taking on that responsibility, is that you now have to situate yourself in regards to oppression and privilege. So that will mean that as an ally, you have to acknowledge where your part, whether it's explicit or complicit, in the ongoing oppression, right? So if somebody says, hey, you're a white, I'm just going to say white male, you're a white male, and that has a lot of privilege in a lot of spaces. Don't be all offended. Don't be like, oh, wait a second, you're calling me out of my privilege. If you're an ally, you're listening, okay? You extend your patience. You create a space that this person can be heard. You kind of hand over your mic to them, and you take a seat and you listen. That's what allies do, and that might be really uncomfortable. Now, what does this mean in a yoga class? I'm not exactly sure.
I think in a yoga class, we're always striving for people to have that inward experience. And I think the main thing is that we're not necessarily calling people's attention to it, but we are letting them know that it's okay to be whoever they are, and that we're not making assumptions, just as like when we give cues to people and we don't, some people do cues like this where they'll tell people like, here's what you're feeling. But, it's nice to do cues where you're sort of like, hey, explore what you're feeling without telling them what you're expecting them to feel. We don't really know what other people's experiences are. And people who are dealing with these issues that may be coming through an experience of their bodies that they may have been repressing, we just need to give them some space to feel their bodies, just like we let everybody else feel everything else that's going on in their bodies. But I do think that there's some things specifically that you can do to create that environment of safety beyond just talking about what are your pronouns, and just kind of in the way that you cue poses, making sure that you're allowing people to just feel what's happening, which I think has to do with bathrooms and with
So spaces,
changing
yeah.
rooms, or, you know, if you're working with people online, I think also just, you know, being aware that you're not necessarily know exactly what's happening in people's bodies.
Right. So you're bringing up two things. So the first one is this idea of a safer space has multiple levels, right? One of them is spiritual, one of them is emotional, and one of them is physical. And sometimes these will overlap, and sometimes these will be separate, but it's never just any one level at any one given time. These are all active, in that you really, as somebody who's running the class, as a business owner, that kind of means you have to be aware, and that may mean you have to hold tension. But talking about space, right, so bathrooms, and this is a huge hot button topic right now, as we see, like, quote unquote bathroom bills coming up.
Well,
Who's allowed
a
in
person
just
who's
certain,
from
right?
Alabama, I heard it going on.
Sure,
Down there.
sure. So what's becoming more common is this idea of having both gender specific and all gender bathrooms. Some people may initially recoil at this, and one of the first things they tend to come up with is safety. But you know, statistically, we see that trans people are not a safety risk for anyone.
It's the opposite way.
Right. In fact, they often become
and everybody in the queer
an
community
endangered
is actually
population.
at a lot of physical risk. In fact, I can remember my friend and our family is friends with Howard Cruz, who's a cartoonist, who's a gay man, and he cartoons about his main character Wendell is a gay character, and he was talking with us about how he and his, at that time, his boyfriend, now his husband, that they could not, even in New York City, walk down the street holding hands safely. And it was really kind of shocking to think that just that basic,
yeah,
you know, like, and especially in a big city like New York City.
Yeah, there's a couple of, I mean, just a couple of years ago, at the end of Pride, at the end of the Pride March, a woman was ejected from a bathroom, from a bar, a restaurant in New York City, because the bouncer had identified her, had misgendered her, and said, well, you're a man, you're trying to go into the women's room, we can't have that. And she's like, no, I'm a woman. And it literally physically had her removed. It was later settled, you know, in court, but yeah, this is still happening. So, I mean, just to bear in mind that, you know, across the board, people who identify as trans people, here's what they want to do in a bathroom. They want to go to the bathroom. Right? This is, and if that sounds familiar, well, okay, great, because hey,
you know, usually when I'm in the bathroom, I'm not thinking about the other people in the bathroom so much.
Yeah, and you know what? Neither are they, right?
We're sort of avoiding each other, actually, most of the time.
Right, exactly. So we're all there for the same reason, right? We just want to do what we have to do, wash our hands, hopefully, and then leave. That's it. That's all. So,
but some people want to be like in a specific space, right? They want to be in the women's room and the men's room, and then
right.
And then if we have the facilities and also to have an all gender bathroom,
right,
that would be the ideal setup if we could.
So for right now, I completely agree with that. And on Stony Brook University on the grounds, they have now installed all gender bathrooms. This is the way they describe it, all gender, in the same building as gender specific restrooms. So there is a choice. And there are people who feel more comfortable going to an all gender bathroom, which has stalls, right? These are unisex stalls that anyone can use. And there are gender specific spaces too. So there is that choice. And I think for us right now in our culture, that's fine to have that choice.
What about like dressing rooms? What can we do to make the dressing rooms, like, should we have sort of little stalls, or, you know, what if you have those dressing rooms where it's just kind of an open space? Is there?
Right. So again, Stony Brook has a choice, and it's a gym. It has a separate space that's all gender. It's usually for just one person, but any one person can use it. And then they'll have a gender specific. And it's interesting because uh, I've seen people use both. So I don't think that if we have the all gender space, everyone's going to want to go into the all gender space. As far as I know, there's been no problem with the gender specific space. And again, I think it's what do we want to do there? Well, we just want to change. Okay, so we're just going to change. Nothing has really been, not to be punny, but nothing has been altered by the inclusion of trans people because guess what? This is all they want to do too. Right. I mean, we shouldn't try to assign or project various needs or motives that just aren't there.
I think that, we're sort of working toward the end of our time, and I want to kind of wind this up by saying that I think the theme of it has been to be, first of all, communicating to people in sort of gentle ways, like, asking the gender or having, a little rainbow flag in there, but also beyond just those sort of gentle communications that you're friendly and having signs on your bathrooms that indicate that you're not assuming, that it's only male or female or the only choices for people in the bathrooms or changing rooms, but that also that you're communicating to people at a human level.
Yes, yes.
That it's not just about like, oh, I have my little rainbow pin on one day in class, and so that, everybody knows I'm safe.
Right.
It's also just...
Well, it goes back to that A word that you use, right? Active. If you're going to be an active ally, what does that mean now? That basically means you are treating everybody as human. So something that the trans community constantly runs into is this idea that they are somehow less than, that they are invalidated, their experience, their identities, their worth. They're all less than. They are less than a man, they are less than a woman, they are less than human. Okay? And to be an active ally means you're going to challenge that and you're going to intervene in really productive ways. So, yes, everyone is human and there is an inherent dignity in everyone. And that's your baseline. And you move on from there.
So that is basically summed up in the word that we use at the end of class, which is Namaste. I honor the divine within you. And that's really living it. And so that's why it's important that we be aware of this issue in the yoga community, because if we're going to honor the divine within people who are seeking something different in their bodies or who are there in a place that's different from other people, experiencing the world in a way that's outside of the norm, then we have to make sure that they know that they can show up in the space that we create.
Yes, exactly. Beautifully said.
Thank you for being here tonight, Stephanie.
Thank you for inviting me. This has been wonderful.
Yeah, and so I think the next topic that we might do is on allyship, because I feel like we kind of opened up this little door into that would be, like with my daughter's age group, there's a big conversation going on about that, but I sort of missed the information.
It's never too late to have that talk. Never too late.
Yes, we'll have that talk.
Please.
Okay. Thanks everybody for attending. We will have this back up. We didn't have anyone attending, but we'll be putting this up on YouTube. Be sure to follow the channel. Click the follow. And also I'll have links below to Sadhana, to the catalog, and to the Facebook group. And Stephanie, do you want to have any information? We'll put some information about Stephanie below if you want to reach out to her. Thank you.